The security officer's casual remark about her clothes echoed through the hushed corridor, a low-frequency hum against the marble and granite stillness of the institutional hall. She felt it more than heard it at first, a shift in the air, a moment where the routine rhythm of footsteps and hushed voices snagged on something unexpected, something small but sharp. Her steps didn't falter, not visibly. She was accustomed to navigating these spaces, not just the physical corridors lined with portraits and history, but the invisible ones, thick with unspoken rules and coded expectations. The comment itself was innocuous on the surface, delivered with a practiced, almost friendly casualness that belied its intent, like a pebble tossed carelessly into still water, the ripples spreading silently but surely. He was standing near the security checkpoint she had just cleared, his uniform crisp, his posture relaxed in the way only those with low-level inherent authority could afford to be. He wasn't speaking loudly, just loud enough for her, and perhaps the aide walking slightly behind her to catch the tail end of it, a phrase about the fabric, the cut, something that implied it wasn't quite right. Not wrong enough to warrant being stopped, of course. Just different. Just noteworthy in a way that suggested mild disapproval, a gentle nudge towards conformity, the kind that only happened when you didn't quite fit the mold they expected, the one they were comfortable with. She felt the familiar, almost instantaneous rise of something within her. Not anger, not exactly, but a tightening, a bracing. It was a muscle memory, built over years of encountering these small, dismissive moments, these tiny assertions of judgment cloaked in familiarity or concern. She didn't pause. Her head stayed level, her gaze directed forward. Her hands, which were holding a slim folder containing notes for a meeting, remained steady, not clenching, not trembling. The aide, Marcus, walking a few paces back, slowed almost imperceptibly, his pace adjusting to hers. A silent signal that he had heard it too, that he was present, watchful. She could feel his awareness, a subtle shift in his energy behind her, the kind that came from shared experience, from navigating these same fraught spaces together. The officer didn't look directly at her as he said it, addressing the space beside her, a technique that stripped the comment of direct confrontation while preserving its pointed nature. It was a classic move, designed to land the blow without leaving a mark visible to casual observers, deniable in its delivery. But it landed nonetheless. It landed in the quiet space between her public persona and her private processing, in the part of her mind that cataloged every such interaction, every subtle indication that she was perceived as an anomaly, a disruption to the expected order of things. The sound of her heels on the polished floor seemed amplified suddenly, each click an echo of the silence she was choosing to maintain. The air conditioning hummed, a constant neutral sound in the background, indifferent to the small human drama unfolding within its controlled environment. Sunlight, filtering through tall, arched windows high above, illuminated dust motes dancing in the air, oblivious particles in a world of weighty consequence. She didn't turn around. She didn't acknowledge the officer with a glance, a nod, or any change in her stride. She simply continued moving forward, each step deliberate, controlled. It was a practiced performance of composure, honed over years of navigating spaces where her mere presence was sometimes seen as a challenge, her confidence interpreted as arrogance, her attire scrutinized with a level of detail rarely applied to others. This was not the first time. It would likely not be the last. But each instance, no matter how small, was a reminder of the persistent, low-level friction that accompanied her journey in these halls of power. The weight of it was not in the individual comment itself, but in its cumulative effect, the constant subtle pressure to conform, to shrink, to be less herself. But today, in this moment, she chose none of those responses. She chose forward motion. She chose silence. She chose to carry the weight of the comment, to absorb its intended sting, and to keep walking, leaving the officer and his observation suspended in the air behind her like an unresolved chord. The corridor stretched ahead, long and imposing, leading to the next meeting, the next negotiation, the next moment where her presence was required, where her voice was needed. And she would get there. She would arrive exactly as she was, wearing what she had chosen to wear, carrying the quiet knowledge of what had just transpired, and the power of her decision not to let it impede her progress. The incident, small as it was, felt significant precisely because it was so common, so unremarkable to anyone not attuned to the frequency of such microaggressions. It was the everyday friction, the constant, low-grade static that others rarely noticed, but which she navigated constantly. And in choosing silence, in choosing to absorb the moment rather than react to it, she was employing a different kind of power, a subtle internal strength that often went unseen, but was profoundly effective. The marble floors stretched ahead, cool and indifferent beneath her expensive shoes. The officer's words, like a faint echo, still lingered in the periphery of her hearing, a ghost of an unprofessional observation. She felt Marcus fall into step beside her, his presence a quiet anchor. He didn't speak immediately, recognizing the moment, the subtle energy shift. He simply adjusted his pace to hers, a silent acknowledgement that he had witnessed the exchange, or lack thereof, and understood the weight of it. His eyes, when she finally glanced at him briefly, held a familiar mix of concern and knowing. They had been through versions of this before, not always with security personnel, sometimes with colleagues, sometimes with members of the press, sometimes just from the anonymous stares of passers-by. The scrutiny was constant, a low-grade hum beneath the surface of her public life. Everything was observed, judged, commented upon, from her policy positions to the texture of her hair, the cut of her clothes. It was exhausting in its persistence, not because the individual comments were devastating, but because their cumulative effect was designed to wear you down, to make you doubt, to make you feel perpetually out of place. But she had built a formidable inner defense against it. It wasn't a wall exactly, but more like a filter, a way of processing the noise without letting it penetrate too deeply, without letting it derail her focus or her purpose. The officer's comment about her outfit was a perfect example. On its face, it could be shrugged off as a clumsy attempt at conversation, perhaps even a misguided compliment. But she knew the undercurrent, the subtle disapproval, the implied suggestion that her appearance was somehow noteworthy in a way that needed commentary, needed to be brought back in line with an unwritten standard. She had learned that reacting in the moment, particularly to these kinds of comments, rarely served her. It elevated the aggressor, legitimized their unsolicited opinion, and often devolved into a public spectacle where her reaction became the story, not the initial provocation. Her anger, her frustration, her very valid indignation would be reframed as difficulty, oversensitivity, or playing the victim. She wouldn't give them that. Not today. Not ever, if she could help it. So she walked. She breathed. She focused on the feel of the folder in her hands, the rhythm of her own heartbeat. She willed her expression to remain neutral, composed, not betraying the slight ripple the comment had caused beneath the surface. Marcus cleared his throat softly. "Everything all right, Congresswoman?" he asked, his voice low, barely above a whisper, pitched only for her ears. It wasn't a question about the officer, not directly, but a question about her, about whether she was okay, whether the incident had landed in a way that required addressing. She didn't stop walking. She kept her gaze forward towards the light spilling from the end of the corridor. "Just fine, Marcus," she replied, her voice even, calm. There was a subtle message in her tone, a quiet signal that she had processed it, that she was in control, that it would not distract her from the task at hand. He seemed to understand. His posture relaxed slightly beside her, his steps matching hers again. They walked in silence for a few more moments, the only sounds the echo of their footsteps and the distant hum of the building. She thought about the officer, his face momentarily flashing in her mind. He probably didn't even realize the impact of his words, or perhaps he did, and that was the point. It was the casual nature of it that was so insidious, the way disrespect could be folded into everyday interaction, presented as harmless observation. It was the constant chipping away, the slow erosion of the right to simply be in a space without comment or critique. But her core was not eroded. It was reinforced, hardened by each such encounter. Each slight, each microaggression was a reminder of the barriers she constantly navigated, the expectations she defied simply by existing as a black woman in a position of power in these historically exclusive spaces. And each time she had a choice, to react on their terms or to define her own response, to meet their noise with her own carefully chosen silence, her own deliberate composure. Today, she had chosen the latter. And as she reached the end of the long corridor and turned the corner towards her destination, the feeling that settled over her wasn't one of vulnerability or defeat, but one of quiet, powerful control. She had absorbed the blow, kept her footing, and continued her forward momentum, leaving the moment and the smallness of the comment behind her. The incident, contained within that brief moment in the hallway, didn't immediately explode into public view. It started as many things do in these networked halls, with a whisper, a shared glance, a story recounted offhand in a nearby office. Marcus later might have mentioned it to a trusted colleague, not as a complaint, but as an observation, a note on the persistent tenor of disrespect they often encountered. Someone else, perhaps a staffer who happened to be rounding the corner just as the officer made his remark, might have seen Jasmine's non-reaction, the way she simply kept walking, and registered it as a moment of quiet tension. The power of the incident grew not from a loud confrontation, but from the sheer lack of one, from Jasmine's deliberate choice of silence in the face of a subtle provocation. This choice, in its quiet dignity, was itself a form of disruption, a refusal to engage on the terms set by the aggressor. It defied the expected response, the one that would have allowed the moment to escalate into a public dispute easily dismissed or twisted. Instead, her composure forced observers, few as they were initially, to sit with the awkwardness of the officer's comment, to recognize its inappropriateness in the stark light of her unperturbed professionalism. The story began to filter out, a low murmur beneath the more pressing matters of policy and legislation. It was a small story, easily overshadowed, yet it resonated with those who understood the dynamics at play, the constant pressure, the casual disrespect that could wound precisely because it was delivered with such practiced ease. It was the kind of story that spread through private channels first, DMs between staffers, hushed conversations in elevators, knowing looks exchanged across crowded committee rooms. Did you hear what happened to Congresswoman Crockett? The retelling focused not on the officer's words, which were unremarkable in their banality, but on her response, or rather, her lack of one. The way she just kept walking, the way she didn't dignify it with a reaction. This was the hook, the intriguing element that gave the story legs. In a world accustomed to immediate outrage, to performative confrontations, her silence was a powerful anomaly. It forced people to ask why. Why didn't she say anything? Why didn't she push back? And the answer, for those who knew her or who understood the strategic calculation involved in navigating power structures as a marginalized person, was clear. Her silence was not passive acceptance, but active control. It was a refusal to grant the officer the power of a reaction, a determination not to let him dictate the emotional tenor of her day or distract her from her work. It was a powerful assertion of her own agency, a declaration that she would not be derailed by petty disrespect. As the story circulated privately, it began to attract the attention of those whose job it was to track the subtle currents of the Hill. Journalists, political strategists, observers of the cultural shifts happening within the corridors of power. They recognized the potential significance of the moment, not just as a personal slight, but as a microcosm of larger issues. The persistent microaggressions faced by women of color, the power dynamics embedded in seemingly innocuous interactions, the quiet ways dignity could be asserted in the face of disrespect. The story was ripe for wider consumption, for it spoke to a truth many experienced, but few articulated so clearly in the public sphere. It was a narrative about resilience, about choosing your battles, about finding strength not in volume but in stillness. And so, the ground was being laid for the moment to shift from a private anecdote to a public conversation, catalyzed by the very composure that initially seemed like a non-event. The absence of a dramatic reaction became the most dramatic element of all. The story began to find its way into the public consciousness, initially through oblique references in political newsletters or cryptic tweets from journalists known for their inside scoops. Heard an interesting story about a seemingly minor incident involving a prominent congresswoman and building security today. The vagueness was deliberate, designed to pique curiosity, to invite speculation. Soon more details emerged, perhaps via someone who had witnessed it secondhand, or through the quiet propagation of the story by those who felt its significance. The incident was described. The context, a Capitol hallway. The players, Congresswoman Crockett, a male security officer. The catalyst, a remark about her clothing. And the key detail, her non-reaction, her decision to simply continue walking. This detail was what set the narrative apart. It wasn't a story of confrontation and immediate viral takedown, but one of absorption and delayed impact. The contrast between the perceived slight and her composed response became the focus. On social media, the narrative began to coalesce. Users who followed the nuances of political life, particularly those attuned to issues of race and gender, picked up the thread. Did you see this? Congresswoman Crockett got disrespected by a security guard and just walked away. That's strength. The commentary wasn't universally admiring. Some questioned why she didn't speak up immediately, suggesting that silence was weakness. But the dominant interpretation, fueled by those who understood the strategic calculation involved, was that her restraint was precisely the source of her power. She hadn't ignored the comment. She had processed it and chosen her response carefully, not on the officer's timeline, but on her own. The more the story circulated, the more people began to see the moment through the lens of her experience, recognizing the familiar pattern of microaggressions that Black women in positions of power often face. It wasn't just about an outfit. It was about who was allowed to comment, who was subjected to scrutiny, and who had the authority, however low level, to pass judgment. The incident became a focal point for discussions about respect, about the invisible barriers that persist even in the most powerful institutions. News outlets, seeing the traction the story was gaining online, began to take notice. Reporters who covered Capitol Hill politics started asking questions, trying to verify the details, seeking comment. The situation had escalated from a private moment to a minor news item, fueled entirely by the public fascination with her lack of a visible reaction. It was a testament to the power of her composure, the way it had inverted the typical script. Usually the aggressor's action was the main event. Here, her stillness, her refusal to be moved, had become the central plot point. This groundswell of attention created the inevitable demand for comment from her. Reporters pressed her aides, hoping to get a statement. Questions were shouted at her during brief public appearances. The pressure was building for her to address the incident, to explain her silence, to offer a definitive response. This was the pivot point. The moment had gone viral not because she had delivered a blistering takedown in the hallway, but because her quiet non-response had amplified the officer's petty behavior and created a vacuum that the public was eager to fill with their own interpretations. Now, the opportunity arose for her to step into that vacuum, not with anger, but with the same calibrated composure that had brought the moment to this point. She hadn't reacted in the heat of the moment, but she was now poised to respond on her own terms, in her own time, and with a message that would reach far beyond that marble corridor. The stage was set for the quiet power of her initial non-reaction to translate into a public statement that would resonate deeply. The media attention, initially a low hum, intensified into a focused beam. Reporters, hungry for a soundbite, pressed her staff. Pundits debated the optics of the situation on cable news. The small, seemingly insignificant moment in the hallway had ballooned into a national conversation about respect, power, and the subtle indignities faced by women of color in public life. The demand for Congresswoman Crockett's comment became louder. They wanted to know what she thought, how she felt, why she hadn't reacted immediately. She remained composed, attending to her legislative duties, projecting an air of unwavering focus. She knew the power of timing. Responding too soon would have felt reactive, forced. Responding now, after the incident had been dissected and speculated upon, allowed her to shape the narrative definitively. During a brief availability with reporters after a committee hearing, the inevitable question came. A journalist, microphone extended, asked about the incident with the security officer and why she had chosen not to respond in the moment. The chamber, moments before filled with the chatter of departing staff and rustling papers, seemed to hold its breath. All eyes turned to her. She didn't shift her weight. Her gaze remained steady, meeting the reporter's eyes directly. She paused for just a beat, allowing the weight of the question and the anticipation in the room to settle. Her expression was calm, serious, devoid of anger or defensiveness. She spoke slowly, deliberately, her voice clear and measured. "I heard the comment," she said, acknowledging the incident without dwelling on the specifics of the officer's words. "And I processed it." Another beat of silence. This pause was significant, inviting listeners into the internal space where her decision had been made. "I decided," she continued, her voice gaining a quiet strength, "that my work was more important than his distraction." The sentence hung in the air. It was concise, direct, and devastatingly effective. It didn't attack the officer directly, though it clearly labeled his comment as a distraction. More importantly, it centered her priorities, her purpose. She hadn't been cowed. She had simply made a strategic calculation based on her own value system. She then delivered the line that would quickly become the viral quote, the core message that distilled the entire incident and her response into a single, powerful statement. Leaning slightly forward, her voice dropping just slightly but gaining intensity, she said, "My clothes did not violate the rules of this institution, but perhaps his comment violated the standard of respect we should expect within it." It was a quiet, rhetorical hammer, delivered with the precision of a skilled debater. It flipped the script entirely. It wasn't about her outfit being inappropriate. It was about his behavior being inappropriate within the context of the institution they both served. It wasn't a personal attack, but a statement about institutional standards and the nature of respect. It was calm, reasoned, and utterly powerful in its framing. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't display anger. She simply stated a truth, drawing a clear line between attire and behavior, between rules and respect. The reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras whirred. The energy in the room shifted. Palpable. She had taken a moment of potential embarrassment or vulnerability and transformed it into a statement of principle. She hadn't won by being louder or more aggressive. She had won by being clearer, more composed, and more grounded in the fundamental values of the institution. She answered a few more questions, reiterating her focus on her legislative duties and her commitment to serving her constituents. But the moment had passed. The soundbite had been delivered. "My clothes did not violate the rules of this institution, but perhaps his comment violated the standard of respect we should expect within it." That was the line. That was the perfect response. It was restrained, strategic, and hit its mark with quiet, undeniable force. The quote spread like wildfire. "My clothes did not violate the rules of this institution, but perhaps his comment violated the standard of respect we should expect within it." It appeared everywhere. Headlines, social media feeds, cable news chyrons. Clips of her delivering the line were shared millions of times, often accompanied by enthusiastic commentary. This is how you handle it. Quiet power. She didn't just shut him down. She reframed the entire conversation. The virality of the quote was a direct result of its contrast with the expected reaction. In a public sphere often saturated with immediate, often performative outrage, her calm, reasoned statement felt like a breath of fresh air, or perhaps a cool, precise cut. It wasn't an emotional explosion. It was a strategic reframing. It appealed to people who were tired of constant conflict, who appreciated the power of dignity and intellect over volume and aggression. Her supporters lauded her composure, her sharp intellect, her ability to turn a moment of potential disrespect into a teaching moment about institutional culture and personal standards. They saw her response as a masterclass in handling microaggressions with grace and power, a demonstration of how to defend oneself without losing one's dignity. It wasn't just about her. It became an example for others who faced similar situations in their own lives, offering a template for a response that centered one's own worth and purpose, rather than validating the aggressor's behavior. The quote transcended the specific incident with the security officer, becoming a broader statement about navigating disrespect in any environment. It spoke to the importance of holding on to one's purpose, of refusing to be derailed by petty distractions, of insisting on a baseline level of respect not just for oneself, but for the standards of the spaces one occupies. The media narrative shifted definitively. The initial focus on the mocking incident now included the perfect response. Analysts discussed the strategic brilliance of her delayed, controlled statement. They highlighted how she had avoided the trap of an immediate, emotional reaction, which would have likely been used to dismiss her concerns. Instead, she had waited, allowed the moment to build, and then delivered a response that was undeniable in its logic and powerful in its implications. Even those who had initially questioned her silence were forced to reconsider their position in light of the impact of her statement. They saw that her non-reaction wasn't passive acceptance, but a strategic withdrawal, a prelude to a more impactful countermove. The officer, though rarely named publicly, became a symbol of the casual, unthinking disrespect that could permeate even the most formal environments. His comment, intended as a small assertion of his perceived authority or discomfort, had been amplified and dissected because of her refusal to give it immediate power. The story wasn't about him anymore. It was about her resilience, her strategic thinking, and the quiet force of her dignity. The viral spread of her quote wasn't just a moment of online popularity. It was a cultural ripple, prompting conversations in workplaces, schools, and homes about how we handle disrespect, how we assert our worth, and the power of choosing our response rather than simply reacting. Jasmine Crockett hadn't just responded to an insult. She had provided a framework for understanding and navigating similar moments, demonstrating that true power often lay not in the loudest voice, but in the most composed and strategically placed one. The quiet strength she displayed in that hallway, amplified by the clarity of her later words, had resonated deeply with a public hungry for examples of dignified resistance. The viral quote, "My clothes did not violate the rules of this institution, but perhaps his comment violated the standard of respect we should expect within it," continued to resonate long after the initial surge of virality. It moved beyond social media feeds and into think pieces, academic discussions on microaggressions, and training materials for workplace conduct. The specific incident, once a fleeting moment in a hallway, became a case study, an example of how seemingly minor interactions could expose deeper issues of power, privilege, and respect within institutional settings. For the public, the incident and her response offered a moment of collective reevaluation. They had seen the initial reports, the description of the officer's comment, and perhaps felt a flicker of indignation on her behalf. Then they saw her response, delayed and measured, and the framing she provided. It wasn't a loud denunciation. It was a quiet, logical assertion of standards. This forced many to look beyond the immediate interaction and consider the context. Why was her clothing scrutinized in the first place? Why did the officer feel comfortable making such a remark? Her response shifted the focus from the target of the comment to the commenter, highlighting the impropriety of his behavior within the professional environment of the Capitol. People began to see the incident not just as an isolated act of rudeness, but as a symptom of a larger culture, where certain individuals, particularly women of color, were subjected to a different level of scrutiny and commentary than others. Her ability to articulate this disparity so calmly and precisely resonated deeply. It validated the experiences of countless individuals who had faced similar subtle, or not-so-subtle forms of disrespect, and had struggled to find the right words to respond. Her quote provided that clarity, that framework. It empowered others to think about reframing the narrative, to shift the focus back onto the behavior of the aggressor and the standards they had violated, rather than getting bogged down in defending themselves or their appearance. The emotional ripple effect was significant. For those who had admired her composure in the initial reports, her statement was a vindication, a confirmation of their instincts about the power of dignity. For those who had questioned her initial silence, it was an education, a demonstration that strategic restraint could be far more effective than immediate confrontation. The incident sparked broader conversations about the nature of authority, particularly low-level authority, and how it could be misused or expressed inappropriately. It raised questions about the training security personnel received and the expectations placed upon them regarding their interactions with elected officials and the public. While the focus remained on Jasmine and her response, the incident implicitly challenged the institutional norms that allowed such comments to occur without immediate consequence. Her response, by placing the focus on the violation of institutional standards of respect, subtly pushed for a re-examination of those standards and their enforcement. The moment became a quiet catalyst for reflection, a reminder that the way we treat each other in professional spaces matters, and that seemingly small acts of disrespect can have far-reaching consequences, particularly when met with a response rooted in principle and dignity. The immediate aftermath saw continued discussion, not just of the incident itself, but of the implications of Congresswoman Crockett's response. Comment sections online filled with debates, some still questioning her initial silence, but the vast majority praising her strategic patience and the power of her words. People shared their own stories of similar encounters, finding solidarity and inspiration in her example. Her quote became a kind of mantra for navigating disrespect, a reminder that you didn't have to match someone's energy or sink to their level. You could, instead, elevate the conversation by appealing to higher standards. The incident faded from the front-page headlines relatively quickly, as is the nature of the news cycle, but its impact lingered in the collective consciousness, particularly within the circles most attuned to issues of equity and respect. Her name became synonymous with handling difficult situations with grace and intelligence. The perfect response wasn't just a soundbite. It was a demonstration of character under pressure, a lesson in leadership by example. The security officer, though never the focus of her statement, likely faced internal review or training, though the specifics were not public. The point was not his punishment, but the clarification of standards. Her response made it clear that such comments were not acceptable, regardless of the perceived power dynamic or the casual delivery. It reinforced the idea that everyone within the institution, regardless of their role, was subject to a baseline expectation of professional conduct and respect. The institution itself, subtly challenged by her framing of the incident as a violation of its standards, was implicitly prompted to consider how it upheld those standards. While no major policy changes might have been announced publicly solely because of this incident, it contributed to an ongoing conversation about workplace culture, diversity, and inclusion within powerful institutions. It added weight to the arguments for implicit bias training, for clearer guidelines on professional conduct, and for fostering an environment where all individuals, regardless of their background or position, felt safe and respected. Jasmine herself moved on, continuing her demanding work, but the incident and her response were woven into the fabric of her public persona, strengthening her image as a composed, intelligent, and principled leader. She had shown that navigating the complexities of power didn't always require a hammer. Sometimes a finely tuned scalpel, wielded with precision and timing, could have a far greater impact. The narrative around her shifted further, cementing her reputation not just as a formidable legislator, but as a powerful voice for dignity and respect in public life. The quiet moments of processing in the hallway, the strategic decision to delay her response, the calm delivery of her viral quote, all contributed to a narrative of strength that was both relatable and aspirational. It wasn't a strength built on aggression or dominance, but on self-possession, clarity of purpose, and an unwavering commitment to her own values. This was the lasting legacy of the incident, not the fleeting rudeness of an officer, but the enduring power of a woman who chose to respond to disrespect with dignity, and in doing so, taught countless others the true meaning of composure. The passage of time allowed for further reflection on the incident and its deeper significance. It wasn't just about one security officer and one congresswoman. It was about the systemic nature of microaggressions and how they function to maintain power structures and enforce unspoken norms. Jasmine Crockett's response became a key example in the discourse surrounding these issues, illustrating how individual dignity could challenge institutional complacency. Her decision to focus on the violation of institutional standards of respect was particularly insightful. It moved the conversation beyond a personal grievance and framed it as an issue that affected the integrity and professionalism of the entire institution. By saying, perhaps his comment violated the standard of respect we should expect within it, she was holding the institution accountable, implicitly asking if this was the kind of environment it wanted to foster. This reframing resonated with people who had experienced similar incidents in their own workplaces or communities. They understood the feeling of being subtly undermined, of having their presence questioned, or their worth diminished by seemingly minor comments. Her response provided a language for these experiences, a way to articulate the harm caused by such behavior, and to demand a higher standard of conduct. The viral quote, stripped of the initial context, became a general principle, that the behavior of those who disrespect you is often a greater violation of standards than anything about you. It was a powerful flip, shifting the burden of inappropriateness from the target to the aggressor. This provided a sense of validation and empowerment for many. The narrative of the incident also highlighted the often invisible labor performed by individuals from marginalized groups in simply navigating spaces where they are constantly scrutinized. Her composure wasn't just a personal trait, it was a practiced skill, a form of emotional labor required to function effectively in environments that were not designed with her in mind. Recognizing this labor added another layer of appreciation for her response. It wasn't just about being calm. It was about the energy and effort required to maintain that calm in the face of provocation, and the strategic intelligence required to channel that energy into a productive outcome. The emotional ripple effect continued to spread, prompting individuals to reconsider their own interactions and the subtle ways they might be contributing to or challenging norms of respect. It encouraged bystanders to recognize and challenge inappropriate behavior, understanding that silence in the face of disrespect, while a valid strategic choice for the target, was not necessarily a neutral stance for the observer. The incident became a touchstone in conversations about allyship and the responsibility of those in positions of power or privilege to create more inclusive and respectful environments. Jasmine Crockett's handling of the situation served as a powerful reminder that strength is not always loud or aggressive. Sometimes it is found in quiet deliberation, strategic patience, and the unwavering assertion of one's own worth and the standards one expects from others. Her perfect response was more than just a clever line. It was a masterclass in navigating complexity, asserting dignity, and using a moment of personal challenge to illuminate broader societal issues. It was a testament to the enduring power of composure, intelligence, and a commitment to higher principles in the face of everyday disrespect. The incident, once a subject of news cycles and social media storms, settled into the broader narrative of Congresswoman Crockett's career, viewed now not as a momentary annoyance, but as a defining instance of her character and leadership style. It became a story told and retold, particularly in educational settings and discussions around professional development. The security officer MOCKS Jasmine Crockett's outfit story, transformed into a lesson on how to handle conflict, how to assert boundaries, and how to leverage personal experience to highlight systemic issues. The key takeaway, reiterated in countless analyses and discussions, was the power of her chosen response. It wasn't the officer's remark that had the lasting impact. It was her response to it. This reversal of narrative power was central to the story's enduring relevance. She didn't allow the aggressor to define the moment or her reaction. She took control of the narrative by refusing to engage on his terms, and later providing a framework for understanding the incident that centered dignity and institutional standards. The quiet journey from the initial subtle slight in the hallway, through her internal processing and strategic silence, to the public delivery of the resonant quote, showcased a profound level of emotional intelligence and strategic foresight. It demonstrated that true strength lay not in matching aggression, but in maintaining composure and clarity of purpose. The visual symbols of the event, her steady stride in the hallway, the still hands holding the folder, the direct eye contact during her statement, became shorthand for her approach, calm, controlled, and focused. The expressions of the onlookers and the viral clips captured from off-screen phones served as mirrors for the public's own reaction, allowing viewers to see themselves in the moment, feeling the initial discomfort of the insult and the subsequent vindication of her response. The themes of microaggression, institutional erasure, and dignity under scrutiny were woven throughout the narrative, making the specific incident relatable to a wide audience who had faced similar challenges in various contexts. Her response didn't just address the immediate situation, It spoke to the universal human need to be seen, respected, and treated with dignity, regardless of one's position or identity. The lasting impact was evident in the way people referenced the incident, using her quote or referring to the way Congresswoman Crockett handled that officer. It became a cultural touchstone, a shorthand for a specific kind of powerful, non-confrontational response to disrespect. The emotional reward for the audience was significant. They witnessed a moment of potential vulnerability transformed into a display of strength, offering a sense of vindication and empowerment. Her composure under pressure provided a powerful model, inspiring people to cultivate their own inner resilience and strategic thinking when faced with similar challenges. The virality of her quote ensured that this lesson reached a vast audience, spreading the message about dignity and self-possession far beyond the marble walls of the Capitol. It was a quiet victory, achieved not through shouting or public shaming, but through the unwavering power of self-respect and a clear understanding of the standards we should demand from ourselves and our institutions. The story of the security officer and the Congresswoman's perfect response became a quiet testament to the power of handling disrespect, not with anger, but with an elevated sense of purpose and an unwavering commitment to one's own dignity. The reflective closure that followed was not a dramatic conclusion, but a quiet settling, an integration of the incident into the larger tapestry of public life and personal experience. The moment had served its purpose. It had highlighted an issue, provided a powerful example of how to navigate it, and sparked important conversations. Jasmine Crockett continued her legislative work, the demands of her office far outweighing the lingering echoes of a hallway comment. Yet the incident remained a point of reference, a quiet footnote in her public story that spoke volumes about her character. The emotional ripple effect continued, subtly influencing how people perceived interactions in their own lives. The concept of a perfect response wasn't about having a witty comeback in the moment, but about the power of a strategic response, one that was timed and framed to achieve maximum impact and uphold one's own standards. It was about understanding that your worth was not determined by someone else's opinion or casual remark, but by your own internal compass and your commitment to your purpose. The dignity she displayed wasn't a performance. It was a deeply ingrained aspect of her being, honed through years of navigating spaces where she was often the only one who looked like her. Her ability to remain composed in the face of subtle disrespect was a testament to her inner strength and her unwavering focus on the larger goals she was working towards. The narrative arc, from the quiet insult to the public reckoning, and finally to this reflective closure, demonstrated the power of a non-linear impact. The moment of provocation was brief, but its consequences, amplified by her strategic handling, were long-lasting. It showed that sometimes the most powerful responses are not immediate, but delayed, allowing for context to build and for a more considered message to land with greater force. The visual symbols, the quiet hallway, the still hands, the direct gaze, imprinted themselves on the public imagination, representing the power of stillness and focus amidst chaos. The incident underscored the themes of the series: the pervasive nature of microaggressions, the importance of dignity under scrutiny, and the profound strength found in restraint. It was a story about how one woman, faced with a moment designed to diminish her, chose instead to elevate the conversation, reminding everyone that standards of respect apply to all, and that one's purpose is more important than any distraction. The closure wasn't about retribution or apology, but about clarity and understanding. The public had reevaluated the moment, seeing it through the lens she provided, and in doing so, had gained a deeper appreciation for the complexities of navigating public life as a woman of color and the quiet power of maintaining one's dignity in the face of disrespect. The story served as a reminder that true strength is often quiet, strategic, and deeply rooted in one's own sense of self-worth and purpose. It was a powerful illustration of how handling disrespect with composure and clarity could lead to a profound and lasting impact, far greater than any immediate reaction could achieve. If this story moved you, share it. Not to go viral, but to remind people what dignity looks like.